Excursus on the Sense of Time. When they came back up from their meal, the package of blankets was lying on a chair in Hans Castorp's room, and he made use of them that day for the first time. Joachim, as the expert, gave him lessons in the art of wrapping oneself the way they all did it up here, something every novice had to learn right off. You spread the blankets, first one, then the other, over the frame of the lounge chair, but so that a long piece was left dangling to the floor at the foot. Then you sat down and began to wrap the top one around you, first flinging it lengthwise all the way up to under the armpit, then tucking the bottom up over the feet, and for that you had to sit up, bend forward, and grab the fold with both hands, and finally tugging the other side over, making sure that the double foot tuck fit tight against both sides to form the smoothest and most regular possible package. And then you followed the same procedure with the second blanket. But it was more difficult to handle, and as a bungling beginner, Hans Castorp groaned quite a bit when he bent forward and reached out to practice the moves as he was taught them. Only a very few old veterans, Joachim said, were able to fling both blankets around them at once in 3 deft motions, but that was a rare and coveted skill, which demanded not only years of practice, but also a natural predisposition. And Hans Castorp had to laugh at that word as he leaned back with aching muscles. Joachim did not understand what was so funny, and gazed at him uncertainly, but then joined in the laughter. So then, he said, as Hans Castorp, exhausted from all these gymnastics, lay there, a solid, unbroken cylinder, the pliant roll tucked behind his neck. It could be 5 below now, and it wouldn't matter. And then he ducked behind the glass partition to wrap himself up as well. Hans Castorp doubted what he had said about 5 below, because he was definitely freezing, and he kept shivering as he gazed through the wooden arches into the damp, trickling drizzle out there, which seemed to threaten to turn into snow again at any moment. How strange, too, that despite the wet, his cheeks still felt so hot and dry, as if he were sitting in an overheated room. And he felt absurdly frazzled from the practice session with his blankets. In fact, when he now looked down at ocean steamships, it lay trembling in his hands. He was not so terribly healthy after all. Totally anemic, just as Director Behrens had said. And that was probably why he tended to chill so easily. These unpleasant sensations, however, were counterbalanced by the comfortable position furnished by the lounge chair and its almost mysterious properties, which Hans Castorp found difficult to analyze, but which had found his highest approval from the very first, and had stood the test again and again. Whether it was the texture of the cushion, the perfect slant of the back support, the proper height and width of the armrests, or simply the practical consistency of the neck roll, whatever it was, nothing could possibly have afforded more humane benefits for a body at rest than this splendid lounge chair. And so Hans Castorp's heart was filled with contentment at the thought that before him lay 2 empty, safely serene hours, the main rest cure, sacred to the rules of the house. Although he was only a visiting guest up here, he, too, found it to be a very suitable arrangement. For he was a patient man by nature, who could spend long hours doing nothing in particular, and loved, as we recall, his leisure time, with no numbing activity to demolish, banish, or overwhelm it. At 4 there would be afternoon tea with cake and preserves, followed by a little outdoor exercise, and then he would come back up here to rest in the lounge chair again, with supper at 7, which, like all the meals, brought with it certain sights and tensions that he looked forward to. And afterward, a peep or two into the stereoscopic viewer, the kaleidoscopic tube, or the cinematographic drum. Hans Castorp had the daily schedule down pat, though it would perhaps be too much to say that he had now settled in, as the expression goes. Ultimately, there was something odd about settling in somewhere new, about the perhaps laborious process of getting used to new surroundings and fitting in, a task we undertake almost for its own sake, and with the definite intention of abandoning the place again as soon as it is accomplished, or shortly thereafter, and returning to our previous state. We insert that kind of thing into the mainstream of our lives as a kind of interruption or interlude for the purpose of recreation, which is to say, a refreshing, revitalizing exercise of the organism because it was in immediate danger of overindulging itself in the uninterrupted monotony of daily life, of languishing and growing indifferent. And what is the cause of the enervation and apathy that arise when the rules of life are not abrogated from time to time? It is not so much the physical and mental exhaustion and abrasion that come with the challenges of life. For these, in fact, simple rest would be the best medicine. The cause is rather something psychological, our very sense of time itself, which, if it flows with an uninterrupted regularity, threatens to elude us, and which is so closely related to and bound up with our sense of life that the one sense cannot be weakened without the second's experiencing pain and injury. A great many false ideas have been spread about the nature of boredom. It is generally believed that by filling time with things new and interesting, we can make it pass, by which we mean shorten it. Monotony and emptiness, however, are said to weigh down and hinder its passage. This is not true under all conditions. Emptiness and monotony may stretch a moment or even an hour and make it boring, but they can likewise abbreviate and dissolve large, indeed the largest units of time, until they seem nothing at all. Conversely, rich and interesting events are capable of filling time, until hours, even days, are shortened and speed past on wings. Whereas, on a larger scale, interest lends the passage of time breadth, solidity, and weight, so that years rich in events pass much more slowly than do paltry, bare, featherweight years that are blown before the wind and are gone. What people call boredom is actually an abnormal compression of time caused by monotony. Uninterrupted uniformity can shrink large spaces of time until the heart falters, terrified to death. When one day is like every other, then all days are like one, and perfect homogeneity would make the longest life seem very short, as if it had flown by in a twinkling. Habit arises when our sense of time falls asleep, or at least grows dull. And if the years of youth are experienced slowly, while the later years of life hurtle past at an ever-increasing speed, it must be habit that causes it. We know full well that the insertion of new habits, or the changing of old ones, is the only way to preserve life, to renew our sense of time, to rejuvenate, intensify, and retard our experience of time, and thereby renew our sense of life itself. That is the reason for every change of scenery and air, for a trip to the shore, the experience of a variety of refreshing episodes. The first few days in a new place have a youthful swing to them, a kind of sturdy, long stride that lasts for about 6 to 8 days. Then, to the extent that we settle in, the gradual shortening becomes noticeable. Whoever clings to life, or better, wants to cling to life, may realize, to his horror, that the days have begun to grow light again and are scurrying past. And the last week of, let us say, 4, is uncanny in its fleeting transience. To be sure, this refreshment of our sense of time extends beyond the interlude. Its effect is noticeable again when we return to our daily routine. The first few days at home, after a change of scene, are likewise experienced in a new, broad, more youthful fashion. But only a very few, for we are quicker to grow accustomed to the old rules than to their abrogation. And if our sense of time has grown weary with age, or was never all that strongly developed, a sign of an inborn lack of vitality, it very soon falls asleep again, and within 24 hours, it is as if we were never gone, and our journey were merely last night's dream. These remarks are inserted here only because young Hans Castorp had something similar in mind, when after a few days he said to his cousin, while gazing at him with bloodshot eyes, "I've always found it odd, still do, how time seems to go slowly in a strange place at first. What I mean is, of course, there's no question of my being bored here, quite the contrary. I can assure you I'm amusing myself royally. But when I look back, retrospectively as it were, you know what I mean? It seems as if I've been up here for who knows how long already, and that it's been an eternity since I first arrived, and didn't quite understand right off that I actually had until you said, 'This is where you get off,' do you remember? It has absolutely nothing to do with reason, or with measurements of time. It's purely a matter of feeling. Of course, it would be absurd to say, 'It's as if I'd been here for 2 months already.' That would be pure nonsense. All I can really say is, a very long time." "Yeah," Joachim replied, a thermometer in his mouth. "It's good for me, too. Since you've been here, I feel as if I have you to hold on to, so to speak." And Hans Castorp laughed at the way Joachim said this so straight out, without any explanation.